What class to choose? A question as old as RotMG, one no one really knows the true answer to. If you've just decided to partake in this wondrous adventure that is Realm of the Mad God, rest assured that you'll find yourself asking this question many times over your realming career. But what is the best class to start with? Well, that's what I'll be discussing today, so welcome to what is the best starting class in Realm of the Mad God. For this video, I will be assuming 3 things about you as a player based on which I'll be giving advice. First of all, you're a noob. Not in an insulting way, but in a way that tells me you're inexperienced in dungeons, enemies, and their shot patterns. Second, you have a bad pet or don't have one at all. This would only make sense since you're new, and getting a pet to a helpful level can take quite some time. Not having a good magic heal pet drastically changes the effectiveness of some classes. And lastly, you're not good at maxing stats. Every video I've watched always recommends classes based not only on their gear, but also on their max stats. I, however, believe that if new players aren't the best at maxing their stats, this info should be completely disregarded, as you can't expect them to just roll into stat maxing without any issues. I'll also only be considering their main weapons during my ranking, as the alternatives aren't very good options with the exceptions of flails and maybe spellblades. Now that that's out of the way, I'd also like to mention that this video will be done in a tier list format for all of you visual learners out there. Now, let's start off going from left to right with Rogue. First thing I'll do is place them on the tier list and offer my explanation afterwards, so you can just skip through if you're not interested in the in-depth stuff. Rogue for me is a solid A-tier beginner class. He uses a dagger to fight at medium range, wears leather armor and has a cloak with the power to make him invisible. Why I think this class excels at guiding beginners on a solid start is mainly down to his ability. Daggers aren't the greatest weapons as they deal medium damage and don't pierce, however they do offer a solid amount of range that helps you stay out of harm's way. What helps you even more is his ability, which allows you to go invisible, meaning the enemies won't attack or chase you as you deal free damage. The only downside to this is that it's pretty much useless in bigger groups of players, especially when the boss doesn't target anyone but rather just shoots a pattern around it. The class also has a solid amount of protection and a slight DPS increase from its leather armor. To sum up, Rogue's pros are invisibility, a great ability that helps you avoid enemy aggression and easily deal damage as you don't have to focus on dodging. Decent armor. Leather armor provides more defense than a robe and a bigger DPS boost than the heavy armors. Mobility. High base speed allows this class to dodge much easier. And medium range. Decent range compared to the melees, not as great when compared to staffs and wands, but overall okay. His cons include poor damage, no real DPS boosting ability, and a weapon that isn't exactly notorious for its damage, and no piercing. Can be a bit of a struggle to clear groups of enemies, specializes at single targets. Overall, a defensively minded class that can deal damage from the safety of its invisibility. On to Archer, who is going right behind Rogue in that A tier. Another solid pick due to his incredibly long range, combined with solid damage and a great ability. Even his armor is decent, being the same leather armor as Rogue's. Definitely a very offensive-minded class that can very effectively minion clear as it has a lot of crowd control. The quiver shot is incredibly useful as it does high damage and inflicts paralyze, which can help out both offensively and defensively. To sum up, Archer's pros are range. Great range, however the true range of bows is a bit shorter. Damage. This class does great damage with both weapon and ability. Piercing. Great at clearing both groups of minions and single enemies. Decent armor. Again, leather armor, same as before. And good ability. The damage plus the bonus of inflicting paralyzed paired with an okay mana cost makes this ability a very good option. His cons include mobility, not the fastest of classes, especially at base speed. True range, has to stand a bit closer to enemies to hit all 3 shots and deal max damage. And survivability. No real defensive attributes, paired with not the best armor specifically for survivability. Overall, a very offensively minded class, very capable of dispatching minions and dealing high damage, but without much help on the defensive side of things besides just armor. Next up is Wizard, who is going into the B tier. If you thought Archer was all about damage, you've seen nothing yet. Meet the Wizard, a robe-wearing, staff-using, spell-blasting glass cannon, whose middle name is Damage. This class uses a staff, a long-range non-piercing weapon along with a spell that blasts enemies with more non-piercing projectiles. Despite this, it's still great for clearing just about anything because of its high damage. Where it loses out, however, is in mobility and defense, as it's a very squishy class that primarily focuses on positioning and dodging as its main defense point. It wears robes, which add to its amazing DPS, however, don't offer much protection. To sum up, Wizard's pros are range. Great range from his staff that allows him to fight at a safe distance. And damage. This class is capable of dealing huge amounts of damage with both his weapon and ability. His cons include defense. Very squishy class with almost no protection. Mobility. Slow and not the greatest at dodging. And no piercing. No piercing on both weapon and ability, however can still clear both groups and single targets without any issues due to his high damage. Overall, a very offensively minded class capable of dealing tons of damage but is very weak on the defensive. Then there's the Priest, who is the first class in the S tier. A polar opposite of the Wizard, with the only similarity being that they both wear the robe armor. The Priest uses a wand, a weapon with the furthest range, yet the lowest damage along with piercing projectiles. His best quality, and the main reason he's in the S tier, is without a doubt his ability. Priest possesses a tome which on use instantly heals him and gives him the healing buff. This is incredibly useful, especially without a good pet, as healing allows you to survive more, take more risks, and you don't have to dodge as much. You also get the option of healing your allies, so it's a great class to play with any amount of other players. Where it lacks is of course damage. To sum up, Priest's pros are range. He uses the weapon with the highest range that allows him to fight from very far away. Piercing. Piercing is just better than no piercing. Duh. Ability. His ability is amazing because it can help you out in too many situations. Having the ability to heal is incredible. And survivability. Despite having almost no armor, the healing on his ability is more than enough to keep him alive through tough times. His cons include damage. To trade for the amazing defensive ability, this class has extremely poor damage. Defense. Overshadowed by the ability to heal, but a con nonetheless as it leaves him exposed to insta-kills. And mobility. Not the fastest class, so dodging isn't as easy as on high mobility classes. Overall, a super defensively minded class, focusing on staying alive and healing while dealing minimal damage. Fights take longer but have a higher chance of succeeding. Next up we have the Warrior, who is going to be the first C tier class. Now before you absolutely attack me in the comments, yes, Warrior is one of the best classes in the game for experienced players. If you're new to the game, there isn't a weapon I recommend less than swords because range is your best friend. Melee classes have the lowest range in the game, and without maxed stats, it can be very awkward to try and get close enough to dish out that insane damage you have when playing these brutes. Warrior wears heavy armor and a helmet, which gives him a lot of defense, but trust me, bosses still hurt up close, even with that much armor. The helm allows you to inspire yourself and allies to shoot faster, and it gives you the speedy status effect, which many players, me included, believe is the best status effect in the game. However, its value starts showing more late game. Melee classes in general will start off well, but will suffer a lot during stat maxing. To sum up, Warrior's pros are: damage. This class does massive amounts of damage just by weapon alone, but his DPS is even higher when boosted by his ability. Mobility. Ability provides him with speedy, which is a great status effect for both going in to deal damage and backing out and dodging. And defense. As a melee, both his armor and helm give him defense, which in turn makes him a bit tankier. His cons include range. Main reason he's so low. Range is your absolute best friend and should not be underestimated, especially for beginners. Yes, you do high damage, but you also take high damage if you're that close to an enemy that you aren't familiar with. And no piercing. Still crazy good at dealing with both single targets and groups, despite having no piercing projectiles. Also has a good alternative weapon in the flail. Overall, a very offensively minded class capable of doing tons of damage, but at the cost of having to stand very close to the danger source. On to Knight, a melee that lands in the D tier. A lot like Warrior, except he trades his mobility and buffs for even more defense and a more hands-on ability that inflicts stunned. Until defense is maxed, this class is still in danger whenever getting close, especially without speed. The ability definitely helps, but is very costly and cannot be spammed, so keeping the enemy stunned is only a temporary fix. This is a class that you really shouldn't play until you learn more about the game, as his low mobility doesn't allow him to get very close and still be fine. Stun helps a lot, but not enough. To sum up, Knight's pros are: damage. All melee classes have incredibly high damage because of swords. Knight is also helped out by his ability. Defense. Even tankier than other melee classes, mainly because of his shield. And ability. An ability that both does damage and creates a great opening for dealing even more damage, as the stun renders enemies completely unable to shoot. As you progress later on, more and more enemies become stun immune, so this ability can be annoying at times. His cons include range. Again, main reason he's this low is getting close can be very scary despite high defense. Mobility. A very slow class to make up for his high health and defense. Ability cost. Very hard to keep enemies stunned because of high ability cost, especially without a good pet. And no piercing. Flails can fix this to an extent. Overall, a fairly balanced class offering both damage and defense as well as a stun. Despite all this, he's still vulnerable when getting close, especially before maxing defense. Last of the melees is the Paladin, who finds himself in the C tier. Like any other melee, he lacks range, which makes him bad for beginners. He's probably the best out of the melees because his ability is probably the most useful one out of the three. He trades the small bit of defense for a seal that allows him to apply the damaging, healing, and plus max HP buff on himself and allies. Being one of the three classes that has healing by default definitely places him higher than the other two, not by much though. After range, his main problem is his mobility, which doesn't allow him to move in and out of close range fights very quickly and can leave him stranded. He trades it for healing, which can be more useful depending on the situation. To sum up, Paladin's pros are: damage. His sword plus his ability applying damaging makes for a lethal combo when up close. Defense. Melee class equals high defense. Whoa. Ability. Ability provides him with healing and max health, which makes him even tankier and more adaptable. And survivability. Due to his healing and high defense, probably the melee I recommend the most if you're determined to go down this path. His cons include range. Yikes, that's short. Mobility. No speedy on this guy either, shame. And no piercing. Flails, duh. Overall, a very balanced class with high damage, decent defense, and healing. As with the other melee classes, it's his range that lets him down. Next we have the Assassin, who I've put in the B tier. He's very similar to Rogue in terms of weapon damage and armor, But while Rogue's ability offers a lot on the defensive side, Assassin is the complete opposite, instead going for pure damage. He offers a lot of crowd control and extra DPS, but is much more vulnerable as he has to face his enemies instead of hiding like a coward. His weapons allow him to stay at a relatively safe distance, especially since the range of the poison exceeds the range of the dagger. Leather armor and higher mobility give him some survivability, but in a game like this, it's never enough. To sum up, Assassin's pros are damage. His dagger is nothing too special, but the poison damage plus weapon boost allow this class to do very decent damage. Range. Dagger provides some safety as the range on it isn't too bad, but the poison offers you range even higher than wands if you offset your camera. Decent armor. Leather armor, a bit of protection, maybe not enough though. And mobility. As a dagger class, his base speed is pretty high, so it allows him to be better at dodging. His cons include survivability. No real protection other than armor can leave him exposed when moving in to hit dagger shots. And no piercing, which is helped out by the poison that allows for crowd control. Overall, an offensive-minded class capable of clearing both groups and single targets, where it lacks is on the defensive, provided only with leather armor and high speed. Now on to the Necromancer, who is, in my opinion, the best beginner class and goes straight to the top of S tier. He's got plenty of range due to his staff. He's got decent damage, but most importantly of all, he's got an ability that's perfect for a beginner class. His skull allows him to not only damage enemies to boost his DPS, but also heal himself and make himself extremely hard to kill. On top of that, the normal tiered skulls also offer extra max HP to make him even tankier. A decent offensive output combined with range and the ability to heal makes this class my top recommendation. It does of course have downsides, mainly in its mobility and defense, but these stats get more than compensated for him in terms of just raw healing. To sum up, Necromancer's pros are range, can deal with opponents from a safe distance due to staff and ability. Damage, both staff and ability provide him with decent damage. And ability, a fantastic ability capable of healing the user instantly and can also be used to deal some extra damage. His cons include mobility. Not a very fast class, so positioning correctly is very important. Defense. His robe doesn't provide much defense, so he relies more on out-healing the damage rather than just tanking it. And no piercing, although the skull can help with large groups of minions. Overall, a very balanced class with decent damage and low defense. What saves it is the ability which single-handedly offers even more damage and even more defense, along with extra HP. He is, however, vulnerable to quick deaths because of his low defense. Next is the Huntress, who goes to the top of C tier. She offers plenty of range and has the same weapon damage as the Archer. Where she falls off is her ability, which is a trap that first has to be thrown, then set, then walked over to activate. It does good damage but is extremely expensive in terms of mana. Not only beginner-wise, this class is widely regarded as an inferior version of the Archer, as the ability gets outclassed in almost every way. The only saving grace is that the ability slows, a very useful status effect that, while not being better than Paralyze, has a lot less targets that are invulnerable to it. She also has the same leather armor and mediocre mobility, which makes her not the best at surviving. To sum up, Huntress's pros are range, high weapon range that lets her fight from a safe distance. Damage, the weapon and ability both have very decent damage. Slow, the ability is very useful despite its high mana cost, as it inflicts slowed, which can be very useful throughout the game. Decent armor, leather armor, and piercing, which helps with groups. Her cons include mobility, not the fastest class. High ability cost, starts off normal but quickly goes up as the tiers progress. Survivability, not many defensive attributes to help out with surviving. And true range, has to stand closer to hit all shots. Overall, an offensively minded class that is capable of dealing damage but misses out on the defensive side of things. Her ability also isn't mana efficient. Say hello to Mystic, cause this should be a very rare occasion of meeting her. I've placed her at the complete bottom of the list because she's the worst class you can pick as a beginner. While she does have high range and okayish damage, her ability is hard to get used to, and even when you do get used to it, it isn't that amazing. The stasis does have some niche uses, but the curse is what you're usually after when pressing that ability button. It does increase DPS, however the length of the effect and the difficulty for a new player to hit the ability successfully does not make it worth it all. On top of that, she's also very squishy and without real armor or mobility. Just no. Don't try and be quirky and different, just stay away. To sum up, Mystic's pros are range, 'cause staff, and damage, decent staff damage that can be amplified by the use of curse that the orb afflicts. Her cons include hard to use ability. Seriously, to quickly explain, the orb inflicts both stasis and curse. To not just freeze enemies for a few seconds, you have to hit them with the edge of your ability because the curse radius is a bit bigger than the stasis one. A cursed enemy takes 25% more damage. Mobility. Yet another slug class. Defense, because robes don't give much defense. And no piercing. Not even the ability can help with this one. Overall, an offensive-minded class with some utility, average damage, and terrible survivability. Next up, it's Trickster, the last dagger class. I've put her at the bottom of D tier. She has a little more attack than Rogue and Assassin, and of course the same range. Her ability is an interesting one as it offers both offensive and defensive potential, but is very hard to use. Controlling decoys has some getting used to, and the teleportation aspect is an incredibly useful one. In terms of offense and defense, she doesn't lack much, as she's defensively better than Assassin and offensively better than Rogue. The reason she's down here is because she's hard to learn and properly play. The other reason is that without a good pet, it's hard to keep an enemy distracted for very long, which leaves her at the same ability as Rogue without the invisibility. A class worth getting into later on, but maybe not as a beginner. To sum up, Trickster's pros are range, but not the best as she uses a dagger. Ability can be used both defensively by distracting the enemy or by teleporting out of harm's way, or offensively by making an enemy stand still and allowing yourself to hit easy shots. Decent armor, leather armor, and she's the most mobile class in the game. Very high speed along with the teleport make her the fastest and most maneuverable. Her cons include hard to learn ability, a very big reason as to why she's here. The ability isn't easy to use, as aiming the decoys and not teleporting in bad spots can be a rough thing for beginners. Costs a lot of mana to keep enemies distracted. A player without a good pet won't be able to distract enemies for long enough to defeat them. Damage. Not the worst damage, but with her ability providing absolutely no DPS, her damage can be something to be proud of. And no piercing. Ugh, not this again. Overall, a very balanced class, but one that is hard to use and is therefore not a good choice early on. On to Sorcerer, a class I'll be putting in the B tier next to the Wizard. That's because they're very similar, both taking on a very damage heavy approach. Sorcerer uses a wand that does less damage but instead pierces. He also wields a scepter that boosts his DPS even further and gives him even more crowd control. If you're choosing between him and the Wizard, think of it like this. Both are very much on the offensive end. Wizard is better against singular targets, Sorc is better at fighting bigger groups of enemies, both will get the job done. Just make sure not to die, as you'll only be equipped with a robe and no real mobility, so positioning and dodging is your best friend. To sum up, Sorcerer's pros are range, highest weapon range in the game in fact. Damage. The combination of his wand and ability allows for quite the damage output. Piercing. Very nice. And good crowd control. Both his piercing and ability allow him to absolutely obliterate groups of enemies. His cons include defense. Kinda like the Wizard, he's very high damage but very low defense. And survivability. No real way of defending himself other than dodging. Luckily his speed is pretty decent, so that's his best bet. Overall, an extremely offensive-minded class, capable of high DPS but no real defense whatsoever. We finally reached the Katana classes. The first is Ninja, who goes into the D tier. Katana classes do have a bit more range than swords, and they pierce, however they have lower damage, so they have to stand near the danger source even longer, making them even more exposed. They do possess abilities to help their DPS, with Ninja having a throwing star that allows it to move at extreme speeds and throw it to deal massive damage. This is another one of those glass cannon classes that focuses purely on damage, as its only defensive gear is leather armor. It mainly focuses on using its high mobility on dodging and getting close to deal high damage, which can get you in a bad spot and get you in trouble. Definitely a class that requires a bit of experience before playing. To sum up, Ninja's pros are damage. The katanas aren't that great early on, but combined with the throwing star, the ninja is still capable of very high DPS. Mobility. Base speed is already decent on the ninja, but with the ability to go speedy on command, its movement speed becomes even faster. Decent armor gives some defense and a small DPS boost. And piercing, for those tough times you're outnumbered. Its cons include range, a bit higher than melee's but still not great, and survivability. Not enough defense to get as close as you need to, so surviving is purely based on dodging with that high mobility. Overall, an offensively minded class that focuses on big damage and high skill dodging. Next is another katana class, the Samurai. I've put him just above Ninja in the D tier because he trades the ninja's incredible mobility for armor and a higher damage ability. His DPS and defense are both superior to Ninja's, but his lack of speed can mess you up, as you do have to get in range of the katana's short reach, which can get you in trouble despite the Samurai's higher defense. Higher tiers of his ability also inflict the exposed status effect, which can boost your DPS even further. Do keep in mind though that this ability is considerably harder to hit than a throwing star. To sum up, Samurai's pros are damage, especially if you're good at hitting the ability. Defense. Heavy armor makes you tanky. Who knew? And piercing. Useful. His cons include mobility, kind of a slowpoke, not gonna lie, and range. Disgraceful. Overall, a fairly balanced class with okay armor and DPS, but is very slow. Bard is one of my favorite classes, so it pains me to put him in the D tier, but I do believe he is the least recommendable bow class to new players. He uses a bow which offers him decent damage and high range, however it's his ability that lets him down. He inspires himself in allies, which offers him longer range and a slight defense boost. I know I said range is your best friend, but extra range on a bow doesn't offer too much, as you have to be close to hit all 3 shots and do decent damage. The slight defense boost isn't even enough to cancel out the fact that this class wears a robe instead of a leather, which makes him a lot weaker to enemy attacks. He doesn't possess much speed, so not even mobility is a redeeming factor. To sum up, Bard's pros are range, so you can fight from afar like a chicken. Damage, because bows are a good weapon choice. And piercing, for that lovely crowd control. His cons include not a very useful ability, boost your range and defense, not for a very long time, and not significantly enough to be considered good, at least not for beginners. Defense, a robe user whose only extra bit of defense is the slight defense boost from the ability, which is not enough to make him not squishy. Mobility, not fast enough. True range, has to stand closer to hit all shots. And survivability, squishy means not good at surviving. Overall, an offensively minded class offering more to others rather than himself. Can become much stronger later on, but as this is a beginner class guide, I can't place him very high. Next is the Summoner, who's going high up into the A tier. It might just be my personal bias, but I believe that Summoner is a better beginner class than Sorcerer, because while they both are damage oriented, Summoner straight up does more damage early and mid game, while the Sorcerer slowly catches up and surpasses her later on. Summoner has the same wand that offers all the range in the world but not the best damage. She more than compensates for this with her ability, which allows her to summon creatures to help her out. This causes her damage output to go through the roof, all from a very safe distance. She doesn't have a lot of armor or mobility, which can make her an easy target, but trust your dodging, you got this. To sum up, Summoner's pros are: damage. With both wand and ability, she's a force to be reckoned with. Range. Wands are already ridiculous, but her ability overshadows even that, with summons being one of the safest ways to fight from afar. Piercing. Yes. And great crowd control, because everything she does is piercing. Her cons include mobility. Not the fastest, but who needs to be when you can just stay away from all the danger? Defense. No real defensive attributes, to be honest. And survivability. No defense, low survivability. Pretty standard. Overall, a very offensive-minded class that does a lot of damage but can't take much. It also has crazy range on both weapon and ability, so standing back and destroying enemies from afar is the name of the game. Last class I'll cover today is the Kensei, who has found himself holding hands with Trickster in that lower end of D tier. Maybe a bit controversial, but I've placed him lower than his two katana buddies because his ability can very much be a double-edged sword. He also has that pesky katana range that forces him to get close to do his damage. What's different from the other two is his ability that allows him to dash over enemies and projectiles without taking damage, instead dealing crazy damage and boosting his attacking output. This is, as it sounds, very high risk, high reward, as you can easily dash on top of an enemy and instantly die. Trust me, I know. You can actually use this ability another way by shooting the enemy with the shots at the end of your dash, but that's boring. Who wants to do that? Kensei does wear heavy armor, which makes him quite tanky, with his ability offering even more defense. The dashes also mean he's got great mobility, so survivability isn't so much a problem for the class as it is for the skill you're required to have to not mess it up. To sum up, Kensei's pros are: damage, especially if you just dash over the enemy a whole bunch. Mobility, dashes make him very good at both dodging and attacking. Defense, both heavy armor and extra defense on ability, what a tanky boy. And piercing, delicious. His cons include range, helped out by ability if you play like a chicken, and very risky ability, high risk, high reward, at least it's fun. Overall, an offensively minded class that likes to get up close and personal, dealing high damage at the risk of dying very quickly. And that should be it. That's my tier list on what is the best beginner class in Realm of the Mad God. I would like to add some tips at the end here to help you understand a few things. Of course, you first have to unlock all the classes, which should honestly be your priority. What you should also do is play every class at least one time every once in a while. That way, you can find out which classes you like and which ones you dislike as you progress in the game. Remember that we're all different and you're your own person whose views might differ from mine, so don't take this video as something 100% factual. I hope I helped you understand the classes a bit better and give you some tips for learning this game. Don't hesitate to take a break if you're not enjoying it, because that's what games are for, to have fun. Thank you so much for watching, and make sure to say hello on my Twitch. I'll answer any questions you might have if you're still unsure on how to get started or progress. You have a great day, you hear me?